Continuing our way down the strange and obscure horror movie iceberg, we arrive at Tier 7, the most obscure. And kicking things off, we have Alien 2 on Earth, released in 1980, an Italian sci-fi horror. In the film, a spaceship lands back on Earth after a failed mission, but the astronauts have been replaced by hideous creatures that can penetrate people's bodies and make them explode. Given the great success of the film Alien by Ridley Scott, director Ciro Ippolito decided to exploit the fame. Furthermore, having seen the poster for the film Zombie, directed by fellow Italian Lucio Fulci, and being that this is considered an unofficial sequel to Romero's Dawn of the Dead, this gave Ippolito the inspiration to make this film. The Track of the Vampire, released in 1966. More commonly known as Bloodbath, the film concerns a mad painter of weird art who turns into a vampire-like man by night, apparently as a result of a family curse, and believes that he has found his reincarnated mistress in the person of an avant-garde ballerina. Bloodbath had a complex and troubled production history marked by various cuts and reshoots. In 1963, Roger Corman had co-produced a Yugoslavia-made spy thriller called Operation Titan, but the film was deemed unreleasable. Corman purchased the rights to another film and assigned writer-director Jack Hill to write a new script. This time, it was a horror film that incorporated previous footage from Operation Titan. Hill wrote and directed numerous horror sequences that were edited into this film, and it was retitled Portrait in Terror. Still unsatisfied with the completed project, Corman hired new director Stephanie Rothman to film additional sequences that were also added. This cobbled-together feature was given a brief theatrical release by American International Pictures under the title Bloodbath. The next film the iceberg lists as The Living Dead, however, I believe it is referring to the film The Living Dead Girl, released in 1982. It was directed by Jean Rollin, who is someone we have covered on the iceberg previously. In the film, a toxic spill revives a beautiful dead heiress who, with the help of her childhood friend, must quench her insatiable thirst for blood. Originally in French, there was also an English version filmed with the same cast and crew, which was directed by Gregory Heller, who would shoot his scene right after Jean Rollin. The English version has never been released and is now considered a lost film. The Ossuary, released in 1970, directed by Jan Svankmajer. This 10-minute documentary is a non-narrative voyage around Sedlec Ossuary, which is a Roman Catholic chapel located beneath the Cemetery Church of All Saints in the Czech Republic. The ossuary, which has been constructed from over 50,000 human skeletons who were victims of the Black Plague, have been artistically arranged to form decorations and furnishings for the chapel. Full Circle, released in 1977. Better known as The Haunting of Julia, directed by Richard Loncraine. It stars Mia Farrow and Keir Dullea. In the film, after her small daughter's sudden accidental death, wealthy American Julia leaves her unhappy marriage in London and buys a house in Kensington that is haunted by a ghost of an obscenely nasty little girl who died in the 1950s, and plans to use Julia as her pawn in a terrible revenge plot. Don't Look in the Basement, Parts 1 and 2, directed by S.F. Brownrigg and Tony Brownrigg. In the first film, released in 1973, a young psychiatric nurse goes to work at a remote asylum following a murder. There she experiences varying degrees of torment from the patients. The UK version was cut by the BBFC to remove a close-up shot of an axe blow to a woman's body, and the film later found itself on the banned list of the video nasties. The cut version was released in the UK in 2005, and the full uncut version was released later that same year under a different label. Don't Look in the Basement 2 is the sequel directed by the original director's son. In 1972, the patients and doctors at Stevens Sanitarium were brutally murdered. Over 40 years later, the only known survivor returns, only to find the ghosts of the past have not been resting in peace. Satur, released in 1951, a fantasy horror produced in the Philippines. The film tells the story of Christina, a pretty young neighborhood girl who is pursued by the mysterious Satur, a wealthy but mysterious young man. When Christina's mother is taken suddenly ill and there appears to be no hope of recovery, Sator says that he can cure her in exchange for Christina being promised to him. Desperate, Christina agrees and soon finds out that she may have made a deal with the devil. Furious, released in 2015. The film tells the story of Natalie, a 26-year-old girl living a somewhat monotonous life. One day, as a gift, her grandfather gives her the trendiest bicycle of the year. Unfortunately, a group of bike thieves who are members of the mafia steal the bicycle. The situation becomes tragic when her grandfather dies trying to protect the bike. A couple of days later, Natalie decides to take revenge. Images, released in 1972, considered the only horror film directed by Robert Altman, the film tells the story of a woman played by Susanna York who is writing a children's fantasy story who is constantly harassed by visits and communications from people who may or may not be real. When she and her husband pay a visit to their isolated countryside retreat, her childhood home, her experience intensifies and she resorts to drastic measures to eliminate the problem. Invitation to Hell, released in 1984, a made-for-TV movie directed by Wes Craven, and one of 3 films he directed that was released in the same year. Its plot follows a family who are threatened to join a mysterious country club in their new Southern California community. The next film on the iceberg is listed as Dead Waters. I'm pretty sure this is a typo error, and instead I believe it refers to the film Dark Waters, which is a body horror film released in 1993. This is one of, if not the first, Western film to be shot in the Ukraine following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The film tells the story of Elizabeth, who, after the death of her father in London, learns that she was born in a remote island where her father financially supports a monastery. She decides to travel to visit the monastery to learn why she should continue to finance the place. On the island, Elizabeth finds a malevolent order of nuns, and there seems to be no escape from the menacing evil that inhabits the place. 3 Mirrors Creatures, Flashes of Flesh, released in 2023. This film clocks in at a whopping 7 hours and 22 minutes. It is an Italian sci-fi horror film, and its plot is described as, in the aftermath of an emotional shock, a ruthless high-class manager faces her own abyss, becoming pervaded by a sensory spirit and undertakes a purifying voyage. This is an almost silent movie. There are no audible dialogues, and only the original score and sound effects are featured in the soundtrack. A Reflection of Fear, released in 1972. Starring Sandra Locke and Robert Shaw, tells the story of a disturbed young girl who starts believing that there is something very sinister at work after her estranged father visits her at her mother and grandmother's house with the woman he plans to marry. This next film, I could hardly find anything interesting outside of a brief plot synopsis. The film is Wilderness, released in 2006. It is a British slasher film, and it tells the story of juvenile delinquents who are sent to a small British island after a fellow prisoner's death, where they have to fight for survival. The Wraith, released in 1986, starring the one and only Charlie Sheen and Randy Quaid. This is a superhero action fantasy horror film, and it tells the story of a small town in Arizona where a mysterious man descends from the sky and manifests in a sports car and targets a local violent road racing gang of motorheads, headed by a ruthless bully who will do anything to get what he wants. Unfortunately, the film's most remembered for a tragic accident that occurred behind the scenes. While filming a chase sequence shot on a mountainside outside of Tucson, Arizona, a crew member was killed and another was critically injured. According to supplementary material on the DVD, the camera car was overloaded and then overturned. Mr. Hell, released in 2006. The film tells the story of a secret bioweapons lab invaded by mercenaries that becomes a house of horrors when they encounter Mr. Hell, an ancient serial killer who takes souls by removing his victims' eyes. The film has a whopping 2.7 rating. The film has a whopping 2.7 with 446 ratings on IMDb. Cards of Death, released in 1986. This film centers around a cop and 2 brothers hot on the trail of a murderous card game. in which masked participants must murder the loser or be killed themselves. The movie was infamously shelved for 28 years. However, when it was finally released in 2014, it was given a limited VHS run. Cigarette Burns, released in 2005. I was a little bit surprised to see this entry so low on the iceberg, as I believe it is more well known than this placing would imply. Cigarette Burns is the 8th episode of the first season of the fairly well-known show Masters of Horror. It was directed by John Carpenter and stars Norman Reedus. In the episode, movie programmer Kirby Sweetman goes on a search for the holy grail of horror cinema, la fin absolue du monde, for an eccentric collector who offers a handsome paycheck. The film, which translates to the absolute end of the world, transforms its viewers into insane, homicidal cannibals with a taste for brutal violence. As Kirby digs up clues and searches for the film's only known print, he ventures into a grisly world of the horrifying and the macabre. I remember watching this episode quite a few years back and have not watched it since, but it has left quite a memorable impression. Blood Tea and Red String, released in 2006 after a production time of 13 years. This is a handmade stop-motion fairy tale for adults. A dialogue-free film tells the tale of a struggle between the aristocratic white mice and the rustic creatures who dwell under the oak. The mice commission the oak dwellers to create a beautiful doll for them. When she is complete, the creatures fall in love with her and refuse to give her up. Resorting to thievery, the mice abscond with her in the middle of the night. This now takes us to Tier 8 on the obscure and strange horror movie iceberg, the black and white and avant-garde tier. Let's kick things off with Le Manoir du Diable, released in 1896. In English, The House of the Devil. This is a 3-minute short film directed by French director Georges Méliès. With the help of a magic cauldron, Mephistopheles conjures up a variety of supernatural characters. Many historians credit this as being the very first horror film ever made. The film was presumed lost until 1988 when a copy was found in the New Zealand Film Archive. Le Chateau Haunt, released in 1897. This is actually a remake of the previous entry. Here the title is The Devil's Castle. It was also directed by Georges Méliès. This is only a 45-second long film where a man who enters a haunted castle is constantly taunted by spirits within. The Haunted Hotel, released in 1907. This is one of the oldest surviving animated films. It combines live action with stop-motion animation. On a dark and stormy night, a traveler takes a room at a spooky hotel in the forest. As soon as the proprietor leaves, the room comes alive with ghosts and poltergeists who torment the man as he tries to unpack, eat, and go to sleep. Il Caso Valdemar, released in 1936, a 12-minute silent Italian horror film. In it, a doctor performs an experiment on a dying man by placing him under hypnosis on his deathbed. I was surprised to see that Edgar Allan Poe is credited as the film's writer, and this is credited as being the first ever, quote, gore film. The Fall of the House of Usher, released in 1928. Directed by J.S. Watson, this is an avant-garde experimental film running only 13 minutes. The visual element predominates, including shots through prisms to create optical distortion. There is no dialogue in the film. A Page of Madness, released in 1926. In this Japanese film, a husband picks up a job as a janitor at an insane asylum, scheming all the time to be close to and free his wife from the institution where she recently attempted to kill herself. The film was deemed lost for more than 40 years, but was rediscovered by its director, Tenosuke Kinugasa, in a rice can in 1971. The next film on the iceberg is listed as The Lake of Horror, and I was unable to find any film with that title, unfortunately, so I don't have anything to say about that one. Next up is The White Reindeer, released in 1952. This is a Finnish horror film. In it, a newlywed woman goes to the local shaman to get some help with her love life, but instead she gets turned into a white reindeer vampire. The Scalpel, released in 1936. This film is presumed lost. The film is presumed lost, but it tells the story of a mad doctor who transforms into a monstrous killer after injecting a serum into his thyroid gland. Most of the cast and crew were students of Seattle's Franklin High School, where the film was shot. Bob Burns, The Monster and the Alien. Bob Burns is a world-renowned archivist and historian of props, costumes, and other screen-used paraphernalia. His collection includes items from some of the greatest science fiction, fantasy, and horror films. Among some of the items found in his museum are the original time machine from the George Pal classic of the same name, the original wolf's head from 1941's The Wolfman, the original King Kong miniature, and the functioning full-sized head of the Alien Queen from James Cameron's Aliens. The Monster and the Alien refer to two of his short films released in 1952 and 1953. Fireworks, released in 1947. Directed by Kenneth Anger, it is the earliest of his works to survive. Fireworks is known for being the first gay narrative film in the United States. Anger describes the film's plot as about, quote, a dissatisfied dreamer awakes, goes out in the night seeking a light, and is drawn through the needle's eye. A dream of dream, he turns to bed less empty than before. Kenneth Anger shot this film over the course of one weekend while his parents were out of town. Following the film's release, Anger was arrested on obscenity charges. This ultimately went to the California Supreme Court, but they threw the case out, declaring the film to be a work of art. And the final entry on Tier 8 is Salome, released in 1973, and The Forbidden, released in 1978. These are two separate short films directed by Clive Barker, and they were unseen until 1998. Both of them star Doug Bradley. Salome is a stylized interpretation of Oscar Wilde's play of the same name, and The Forbidden is described as a nightmare vision in which a man is transformed into a living artwork. We have now reached the darkest depths and the final tier of the strange and obscure horror movie iceberg. Tier 9 refers only to lost films and one fake one. Kicking things off on Tier 9, we have London After Midnight from 1927. This stars Lon Chaney, and it tells the story of an abandoned home of a wealthy man who supposedly committed suicide 5 years earlier is taken over by ghoulish figures. This is widely considered as one of the most sought-out lost films. It is believed that the film existed until 1965. Inventory records indicate that the only remaining print was being stored in MGM's Vault 7, which was destroyed by a fire that year. In 2002, Turner Classic Movies commissioned a restoration which produced a 45-minute reconstruction of the film. Director Todd Browning would actually go on to remake the film as a talkie in 1935 called Mark of the Vampire, starring Bela Lugosi. The Cuckoo Clocks of Hell refers to the original title of the film The Last House on Dead End Street. This original director's cut ran nearly 3 hours long and was edited down to the version we have now, which runs 78 minutes. The film tells the story of a man by the name of Terry Hawkins, played by writer-director Roger Watkins, who, after serving 1 year in jail, decides to repay society by making snuff films. 4 people are captured, tied up, and held as material for his project. One by one, they are killed in scenes for the camera. Sadistic Bitch from 2002, directed by Brad Jones, who is most well known as the creator of the Cinema Snob series. In the film, after discovering that her husband has cheated on her, the vengeful Melanie documents her exploits to gruesomely turn her husband, Jason, into a woman through means of such tools as power drills and tongs. The film was never released and was later stolen from Brad Jones's home shortly after production. Although in 2018 he stated it is possible that he might have a few scenes remaining, existing only as raw footage, but the film as a whole is thought to not exist any longer. Genuine, released in 1920, directed by Robert Wine, who also directed The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which appeared earlier on the iceberg. The film's eponymous character Genuine is a succubus who uses her powers of seduction to torment and control the men who love her. Genuine was edited down into a 43-minute condensed version, which is the cut that has been most commonly available. And while the complete 88-minute version has never had a home video release, shockingly, I learned that the unedited cut is actually available here on YouTube. The Golem, released in 1914, a silent German expressionist horror film directed by Paul Wegener. A golem is an animated anthropomorphic being in Jewish folklore, which is created entirely from inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. The film is about an antiques dealer who finds a golem that has been brought to life for centuries earlier by a Kabbalist rabbi to protect his people from persecution. The dealer resurrects the golem as a servant, but it goes on a rampage. The film is not entirely lost, as some fragments do exist. Most recently, the second reel was discovered in an Argentinian archive in 2017. The Terror, released in 1928, a pre-code horror film directed by Roy Del Ruth. In the film, guests at an old English manor house are stalked by a mysterious killer known only as the Terror. The film has been considered lost since the 1970s, though a complete set of the soundtrack still exists. The Werewolf, released in 1913. This is a silent short film about a Navajo woman becoming a timber wolf. The film was unfortunately destroyed in 1924 when a fire broke out at Universal Studios. Event Horizon Director's Cut, from 1997. Directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, the film tells the story of a rescue crew who is tasked with investigating the mysterious appearance of a spaceship that has been lost for 7 years. Director Anderson's initial cut of the film ran 130 minutes, whereas the version we now have is only 96 minutes. His original cut was so violent that both test audiences and the studio balked at the finished product. Paramount ordered him to cut the film by 30 minutes and tone down some of the violence. Some of the movie's lost footage include a great deal more of the hell sequences. According to producer Jeremy Bolt, they made these scenes as grotesque as possible, figuring that, quote, "If you're going to go to hell, you've really got to do it. You can't tap dance." In order to make the shots of body parts getting damaged in many ways look more realistic and therefore a lot more violent, they hired real-life amputees dressed in extensive makeup and outfitted with practical special effects. Actor Jason Isaacs mentioned in a 2023 interview that the scenes were shot on an adjacent soundstage and included, quote, "things that are definitely illegal to do now and probably illegal to do then." Some of the crew actually had to leave the set during filming when they started feeling sick. According to Anderson and Bolt, most of these shots were cut because during the screening of a rough cut of the movie, the test audience was genuinely disturbed by what they saw, and some people even reportedly fainted. Unfortunately, what remains of the director's cut of the film was not preserved and is known to be officially lost. All-American Massacre, from 2000. This is a spin-off of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper's son, William, and it stars Bill Moseley. The film was set to act as both a prequel and sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1 and 2. Moseley returns as Chop Top, who has been captured and placed in a psychiatric prison. We'd see various memories of his family throughout the film as he was interviewed by a tabloid. Chop Top would then escape and start a new massacre, an All-American Massacre. Despite having been completed, the film has never been publicly shown. Reasons why are unknown, but they are suspected to be rights issues. Der Januszkopf, from 1920, a lost German silent film. The English title is The Head of Janus, directed by F.W. Murnau, who also directed Nosferatu, which we also saw earlier on the Iceberg. This is an uncredited version of Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The protagonist here is Dr. Warren, who indulges his evil nature by periodically turning himself into the depraved Mr. O'Connor. Amy's Night Out, from 2007. And I'll just say this is a weird one, as there is next to nothing on this film on the internet. According to IMDb, it tells the story of Amy, a single mom who suddenly finds herself lost while trying to escape a nightmare that ends up being a frightening reality. Apparently, the film is 11 hours and 15 minutes long. There is no trivia or reviews on its IMDb listing. I found a couple Reddit posts of people asking for info about it, but nothing has been provided. The other links that Google provided are to foreign websites. There's no Wikipedia entry for it either. It seems to be an actual film, but that is really all I was able to find out. And the final entry is La Rage du Démon from 2016. In English, The Fury of the Demon. This is a documentary investigation on the rarest and most controversial French movie in the history of early cinema. A fascinating, lost, and dangerous short film which causes violent reactions to those who watch it. And this is the fake film on the list, as the subject film of this documentary, The Fury of the Demon, doesn't actually exist, and therefore it makes this film a mockumentary. Well, that concludes the strange and obscure horror movie Iceberg. I sure enjoyed making it and researching all these films. It was a whole lot of fun. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.